Back in the store, Back Pocket Films, season 2. So we've pulled a VHS copy off the shelves today. I know you're excited to talk about The Burbs with Tom Hanks.
Yeah, I can't help but have like just giddy laughter building up. I had to. I mean, it's such goofy, great fun.
Was this one of your favorite movies when you were a kid?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we watch it all the time, and then in high school it kind of came up again amongst my friends and I, and we would quote it all the time.
You almost watch it differently when you get older too, right? There's maybe jokes you get better because you know.
I remember it was like we were all together, all in my friend's room, and we threw it on just out of like nostalgia's sake, just to kind of because we were referencing it so much and quoting it.
Right.
And yeah, there's just so many little Easter eggs and moments.
Such a well-written film.
And just to kind of for a moment have just a little love letter to Joe Dante.
Yeah.
Because as a kid growing up in the 80s and coming of age during the 80s and 90s, he was one of the first directors that I noticed. Or at least kind of referenced and said like, oh my God, he directed this and this and this.
Could you feel that there was just a specific aesthetic of how he made a movie?
Once I knew once I put them all together.
Yeah.
Because it was like I watched Gremlins and then Inner Space.
Yep.
And with Inner Space, it was like not only is it a fun movie to watch, but I would, like the dance that Martin Short does, I would do the dance.
Yeah.
And then I consider The Burbs, Gremlins 2, and Matinee like this kind of this holy trilogy of his, because watching it, especially as a kid growing up and loving science fiction movies and loving all those creature feature movies, like I remember watching Explorers and being like, the kid has an It Came from Outer Space poster in his room. He talks about This Island Earth. He talks about Forbidden Planet.
Explorers was one of my favorite movies, period.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just a special film.
It reached out to me as like, oh, that's like me. Like, I know those movies. Yeah, I'm the kid that likes those movies.
He was never afraid to be unabashed about his love of film.
And he was, and it's like, it's a way to make those films personal to him. And then The Burbs hit at that right time where I had just gotten into Hitchcock, so I was watching Rear Window. I just got into watching Twilight Zone episodes. And it's like this movie is like a confluence of all of those things.
Yeah.
And even rewatching it now, I look at it and I'm like, wow, man, like it's like The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street meets Rear Window meets...
You know, it's funny how I didn't think of Rear Window, even though it's sort of on the nose with it, right? It's sort of like, I forget, Men at Work, you know, where it's like sort of just like blatantly there.
Right.
But it really is so, I think it speaks more to just the success of the execution of just the film.
Right.
Because it has so much of its interior mythology intact, even though it has all the references.
Right.
So it's almost using references as parts to like build something of its own.
Yeah, and learning about how it was made, because it was made during the writer's strike. So the writer was there,
right?
But they couldn't.
Well, he had to like find the loophole of how, because it's such BS that otherwise the studio wouldn't let the writer on the set.
Right.
So he put him in the film.
Right.
So cool.
And then. And because of the great cast that he has Tom Hanks, he has Carrie Fisher, he has
Bruce Dern.
Bruce Dern, for God's sakes, and then was it Ralph?
What's the name of the guy who plays the friend?
Yeah, Ralph Ducommun.
He is great.
He's amazing, and all of these people, it's kind of like a Howard Hawks film where it's like it's the group of people that are working together and have these scenes together, and it's so much fun watching them play off of each other and the little kind of like interior relationships that they have. That Tom Hanks and Bruce Dern are not friends the way he and Ralph are, but Rick Document. I'm sorry, not Ralph. But you get it. Like, you get the way that it's like, it's the neighbor that I have to put up with, but then this whole thing brings them together. And it's so much fun, and it's so funny. And not in a like, oh, it's funny in a 80s way or in a nostalgic way.
I love all these, how it's like there'll be two people on a lawn talking about the people from across the way, and they'll be like, and it's like, it's just such a, it's been done before, and then has been done afterwards with like Desperate Housewives and these different, anything that plays with the idea of that there's all this stuff going on in these communities that you wouldn't expect it to be. There's sometimes the most messed up stuff going on.
And you've, Tom Hanks and Carrie Fisher feel like they're married. Like, they have so many moments together where it doesn't feel like it's fake. It doesn't, and then
all their conversations feel real.
Right.
The whole conversation they have after he is like coming inside and talking to her, when they talk about the staycation or talking about is just very believable.
This is what I need. I need this. And just to have, like, Tom Hanks, we almost take him for granted now.
I know.
That
you take his choices take for granted that they're choices, right? You just think, well, he's just acting zany and this and that. It's like, no, every single thing he does is a choice that he made specifically.
Right.
And Dante talks about how just amazed he is by him, of how he processes this stuff with while still being natural. Right? Like, that's how he sort of grew into the actor that he became, is by finding the reality within the comedy.
And you feel like Tom Hanks has talked about how at a certain point in the 80s, he went to his agent and he was just like, I don't want to play, and pardon the language, but he's like, I don't want to play pussies anymore. I don't want to play the young guy who wants to get the girl, but he can't get the girl because he's shy. And he wanted to play adults. And it's funny because he and Dante kind of went back and forth because he was apprehensive about playing a dad. So he kind of begged him to like, does the kid really have to be there? Like, maybe write him out. Like, he's not really doing anything. But he wanted that, like, the kind of Leave It to Beaver, the good neighbor, the good dad next door vibe. And he plays it well. Like, anything that's what's amazing is looking at Tom Hanks's career is like, any character he gets thrown at him, he does it well, and no performance is really the same. That's why I feel like he's taken for granted, especially during moments in this. I mean, the whole scene where they all go over to the Klopeks is like a comedy tour de force. Like, there's nothing funnier.
It's so
for me.
great, especially when they're in the house.
Yeah.
I mean, the stuff on the porch with the, is it the brownies?
There go the goddamn brownie.
There's a great quote from Tom Hanks that I pulled from, but it's so great because you don't really think about his approach to acting very much, right? So he says, here's a guy with a great life, a nice house, wife, beautiful tree. I love that he says that. Nice neighborhood, and he's happy. Next day, he hates it all. And I thought something must have happened to him off stage. And that's the challenge for me of the part, to communicate Ray's off-screen dilemma. One of the reasons Ray doesn't go away on vacation is because it's another extension of the normalcy he's fallen into. So he thinks he'll try a more bohemian thing, which is just hang around the house. With a week's worth of free time on his hands, he's drawn into the preoccupations of his neighbors who always seem to be at home. But what I did is just backstory embellishment that any actor will do. Perhaps from my repertory experience, I don't ask a director for motivation. If he says go over to the window, I have to find the reason myself. I mean, you don't necessarily think of Hanks as one of these guys that's doing all this off-screen research in his own mind of what he thinks motivates certain things with the character. But that's great, man. And we talked about Depp doing a similar thing in Ed Wood of just how to funnel it. But this seems more like intellectual almost, like what can I use to really identify with this and figure out what is motivating me,
and to think about, what happened the day before, the week before,
yeah,
the month before.
It's great stuff. It's great. I mean, obviously in plays because it's just that it really provides that immediacy, but it's great to hear about film actors doing that because you want it to feel as real as possible for yourself.
And it also tapped into, and it's one of the reasons why, like I remember so vividly being a kid and seeing the trailer or the commercial, and it was only him and Rick when they find the bone, when they find the femur.
Yeah.
And all it was just Ray, this is Walter, and the whole yeah. And I loved it so much. I loved that commercial so much, and I would imitate it around. And then the movie came out, and for some reason, whether it was my parents thought it would be too dark, or they thought it was PG-13 and it was really PG. Yeah. Had a similar issue with Beetlejuice. Like I had to beg them and be like, no, it is PG. It's not PG-13.
Right.
But so I missed it in the theater. But then HBO comes on and I'm watching it, and it really does tap into most kids growing up have that house down the street, and I really did. Like the neighbors next door were called the Fitters, for Christ's sakes, and one of them just got out of a mental institution.
Yep.
And my parents had to sit down with me and be like, this is what happens if he comes over. Just do this and do that.
We had one on our street too.
Yeah.
I mean, where you just never really see the people, and then the stories just build themselves up, right? And you don't really know what the truth is.
And as a kid watching movies, you're like, let's spy on them and let's create this whole thing. So that's really what this movie was for my friend and I, who were neighbors. It's just it was kind of like our Bible of how do we deal with this really serious thing in a goofy, childlike way.
Did you sort of vicariously adopt some of these
oh yeah,
just how to deal with it,
pretending because my dad was in the Army and I had all the Army clothes. It's like that by default I become Bruce Dern.
Dude, one of my favorite moments is when he's pretty much almost like Tackleberry, the way they present him, right? Is when you get that image of him as this just hardened military. He's been through, and then when he goes,
I knew
he goes, why didn't you go up there? He goes, it's really high. I love Bruce Dern, the
so
way, and then Hanks has a reaction too, to him. He's like, are you serious? Oh man.
It's filled with those moments. I don't know what is with him peeling the wallpaper, but it's great. It's like a cat. It's just he just has to kind of pick at it, right? And all throughout it's just there's so many lines and so many moments. Them staring at the house at night, and then the garage door opens, and the car backs out. Guy comes out with a bag that's really heavy, can hardly deal with it, gets it into the trash can, goes back to the car, comes back with a stick, beats the trash with a stick, and then goes back, drives in, garage door closes. And just the way, I've never seen that. I've never seen a guy just drive his trash to the end of the driveway and beat the hell out of it with a stick. I've never seen that.
Yeah.
And little things when he comes out with the cigar, and he's he comes outside every night at the same time to smoke a cigar. He doesn't know I know that.
Right. There's little things that Freakies is an actual cereal from the 70s. I watched a commercial of it. It's just great that Joe Dante's so I really want to have Freakies there. Do you remember Freaky? And then when the neighbor, when his buddy, when he's out of syrup Did you notice that he
puts
puts
the
it
empty one.
back in the refrigerator,
Yeah.
the empty bottle, and grabs another one?
Right.
I mean, and the reason it's funny is because it's not telegraphed.
No.
It's not making that the funny thing.
Right.
That's just something he does.
Right.
And if you are watching and you notice, it's a gift to you.
Yes.
It's like an extra gift.
That's what I mean. Like, it's just filled with those types of Easter eggs.
Yes.
Because, yeah, the funny thing is that he just comes over and just eats all of
Right.
their leftovers.
And actually, I think Seinfeld kind of took a little bit maybe from that of Kramer and how he would come over and
Right.
just start making a bowl of cereal. Right? I mean,
well, and kind of like the Seinfeld thing, and even like a little bit of like Wes Anderson is it's the fun of watching adults behave like children more than
but grounding it
Yeah.
in a very
Yeah.
realistic world where it's not played for laughs. And I think it's just a testament to Dante's comedic sensibilities, man, and so perfectly aligning with Hank's and the quality of the cast. There's a line that Hanks has when he goes, "As soon as that car leaves in the morning, I'm going over the fence, and I'm not coming back till I find a dead body. Nobody knocks off an old man in my neighborhood and gets away with it." I mean, that is such a great line.
How about when he? So I think the line is like, "So what, did you permanently dissect your balls and give it to your wife?" And then he goes into it, reaches into his, and he pulls out the toupee. But he's talking about it, and then all of a sudden Bruce Dern is like, "You had that in your pants the whole
time.
day?"
That's so good.
But
Yeah, and even a line like that is not played for laughs. It's just something that you would say.
Right.
And that's where it's almost. And the thing is, I read that Dante was very open to improvisation.
Yep.
Which that is a line that if you said it in an improv scene, you would say it from a truthful place. You wouldn't be trying to get laughs. You'd be like, "You've had that in your pants the whole time." It's something someone would naturally think.
Right.
It's like,
Right.
what the
It's
hell?
just an observation. Yeah, and Corey Feldman, who,
yeah.
you know, it could be like, you know, looking back, the most 80s thing about the movie, but even he is tempered in that way, and he's just playing like it's,
And he does a
he's
good
the-
job. He's maybe
Yeah.
a bit one-dimensional.
Right.
But, you know, he's sort of playing that Corey Feldman character
Yeah.
that he was
Right.
in everything except for Stand By Me.
Right.
You know?
And and this is with every Joe Dante film, there's always movie references, but they're not obvious.
Yeah, what are the
Like,
movies? There's like 3 or 4 movies that are playing on the TV.
Yes. So one, he mentions this. Did you ever see the movie The Sentinel?
No.
And it's like no one's seen the Sentinel, but he's like, no, this is a movie that you should know,
Right.
you should watch.
Yes.
So I'm gonna have the guy say it because then that'll make
See, that makes me feel better because, like in this book I wrote, I had these obscure these references to obscure literature, or maybe more obscure than the average person would. And it's like it makes me, it fulfills something in me to hear that, because it's like, you know what? It's like there's this thing in my brain of like, oh well, like, is that something that an editor is going to tell you to remove?
Right.
Because it's like, it's superfluous. That's self-gratifying. That's not something. It's like, no, but who cares?
Right.
Like, what if that's the way you want to work? Is like, you know what? I want people to see the Sentinel, so I'm gonna have this thing in my movie.
and that's what he does. And even like the podcast that he guests on now that I'm listening to.
Gotta start listening to it.
You got to start listening to it. But he's that way. He's this wealth of knowledge.
Yeah.
In a very Scorsese
And it's
way.
about the learning. It's not about being the smartest guy in the
No.
room, right? That's what's great about it.
Because like, and this is the joke is the host will always say to the guest, Joe's seen everything. And he's like, I have not seen everything.
Right, because
Like,
he goes to him.
Right.
He's like, well, you don't understand. I haven't watched this and that.
Right. But he's like that,
That's
and
great.
he loves giving. He loves giving the underdog film that no one talks about its due. And when they're doing the dream sequence, which is amazing, But there's 20 references within that dream sequence, and it's not all movie. Like, yeah, he's watching Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and The Exorcist comes on, but there's also like that movie that he's watching where they're burning the girl. It's like I had to look it up. Nice. Like, what is that movie? And it's like this random 60s, 70s horror movie that I can't even remember what it is.
But and I have movies like that for myself of when I remember when I discovered them, like Ride the Pink Horse, where I'm like, I'll always remember that. Right. And the fact that it's not one of the better known, like the fact that you really, like it means it's special to you. And it's, I think his road, reading about his road to filmmaking, it was not a, he definitely paid his dues.
Right.
And got really good at understanding all the different aspects of filmmaking. So that by the time he was directing his own movies, I mean, he knows how to pull it off.
Right. And he comes from that Roger Corman world. He was doing trailers for
And you
him.
can tell.
Yeah.
It's almost like if Roger Corman had more toys at his disposal.
Right.
Right? Like more studio money. Like what would he be? Yeah. Because he does maintain that same sensibility, which is the love of movies. And that is at the core, and that's why when people try to like downplay Corman films, it's just like you are missing the point.
Right.
sit in the seat, eat the popcorn, watch the movie, the magic will happen, you know?
So then within that he makes, so there's Hollywood Boulevard and Rock and Roll High School, and then he makes Piranha.
Yeah, love that
which
movie.
Which is like, out of all the the movies that are trying to be like Jaws, it's definitely the best because and this is true with all of his movies, he's got enough of a sense of humor to not take himself so seriously, but he's not going to, it's not all a joke.
Right.
Like it's the same thing with The Howling.
Well, I think the Howling, I mean, the effects in The Howling are some of the best ever. Yeah. Was that Rick Baker? In tandem with, or no, Rick Baker did
Werewolf
in London.
So that's a funny story because Rob Bottin was Rick Baker's understudy.
Okay.
So when John Landis was trying to get American Werewolf in London made, he was talking with Rick Baker. They developed this idea about the transformation. And then he couldn't get the money, it slipped out. Joe Dante comes in and says, hey, I have this werewolf picture, The Howling. And he's like, okay, I'll do it, but I'll try to, I'll vary it a little bit. It won't be the same thing that I'm doing with Landis. And then Landis calls him, he's like, I got the money. And he's like, oh, I'm doing this movie, The Howling, with Joe Dante. And he's like, what are you talking about? You're doing the picture.
That's funny.
So then Rob Bottin got the job on The Howling, and Rick Baker did. And it's like...
And they're both great flicks. They're both different.
Yes.
I noticed that a predominant theme throughout his work is just the ability to navigate different genres and fuse them together. I mean, if you look at all those films we discussed, it's like comedy, pathos, like thrills. He really just understands how to weave it all together,
right,
and have it feel like one thing. I mean,
and it's not like he has an understanding of that classic mode of American storytelling so well that even when he is going on these flights of fancy and kind of shifting in between genres, he's still got that core.
He lands every single spoof like satirical thing he does in it. When he's doing the ultra zoom in on, and then he does it to the dog.
Yeah.
Like that is funny. It was laugh out loud funny, man.
Yeah.
I mean, I was like really laughing at like some of these parts.
It really is genuinely funny. Even in like most movies that you loved as a kid, you go back and they don't necessarily hold up, or the laughs.
Funny Farm was one of them for me, where I'm
Right.
like, damn, I remember this being funnier.
Yeah.
But this was like fresh. This was like, oh man, I just didn't want to stop watching it.
Right.
And man, that says a lot about a movie.
Yeah.
And a world that someone creates. You don't want to leave that world.
And it's hard because, and it's the same with all of his movies, is that he's very underrated and very, I don't know, he just doesn't get his due as the director that he is for the movies that he is, because
He almost made it look too easy, to be honest. I mean,
maybe and like they're movies that are so easy for people to write off or say.
I think that's what I meant more. That it's easy to take him for granted, to take what he's doing for granted.
Right. You know, Gremlins 2 is.
Dude, how did he? I mean, it's so crazy that Key and Peele did an entire skit based on how the hell did this thing get greenlit?
Right.
Right. What did that meeting look like?
And that is like it's a sequel. It's a sequel like Bride of Frankenstein, or a little obscure, but Curse of the Cat People, where it's almost like he's saying, I'll do the sequel, but I'm not doing it the way you want me to.
Yeah.
I'm doing my own
And it's
thing.
almost like, let's blow it up so that they can't make a Gremlins 3. Right? It's almost like we're going to leave this thing so in shambles. I mean, you hear a similar story about Head, which is basically the monkeys were at this point, we're like, let's just blow it all up. Let's just make something that people are like, what am I watching?
Right.
Because that movie, Gremlins 2, is, I mean, there's a reason, I do want Gremlins 1 on Blu-ray at some point, but there's a reason I own Gremlins 2 on Blu-ray and not Gremlins 1 if I was going to own either of them.
Right.
Because there's something about it that is just so marches to its own drum that it just needs to be applauded. It's like, who else but him could make that film?
Right. And again, in the character of Robert Prosky as this,
yes,
Grandpa Munster.
It's
type.
similar to Martin Landau and Ed Wood.
Yes, and that's how he's like, I'm going to infuse this with my love of movies and my hatred of the corporatization of the movies that I love.
And the greed that ignores creativity and doesn't care about that.
Right. And Matinee, which I know we talked about.
Yeah, I can't wait to watch it.
But like, I remember my brother went to go see it in the theater, and he came home and he's just like, I saw your movie. Like, I saw the movie that was made for you. And he would just keep talking about it like that. It's like I can't believe, I was watching it and just all I could think about was you and how you love movies and all this stuff. And then just watching it, and it's a movie like Ed Wood that just celebrates your love of movies so well. And hits that spot.
How is The Majestic? I never saw it. Is that a similar motif involving a movie theater?
It is, until the ending's kind of ridiculous.
Gotcha.
In a very it's almost like Frank Darabont wants to be Frank Capra and wants to make a Frank Capra.
Well, and Jim
movie.
Carrey wanted to be Jimmy Stewart, so that's an interesting parallel.
But he swallowed something wrong and just didn't do it.
Gotcha. Yeah.
It's a little too fantastic.
Yeah. But would you say Matinee is one of, it's maybe not one of Dante's like 4-star, 5-star pictures, or is it right?
No,
up, is it up there with these other
Oh
movies?
yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
It's better than it's almost it's maybe his best movie. But no one.
Now I really want to see it.
But no one. It was.
It
completely
remains kind
passed
of
over.
his most unsung, really.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, because no one saw it.
Right.
And
who knows? It could have been competing in a season that it was just swallowed up. I mean, what am I going to see? Am I going to see this one that's been so publicized? Like, right? I mean, that's how a lot of it works.
Well, and what's weird about his movies is that, and he talks about this. He's like, the only real true hit I ever had was Gremlins.
It's true.
Like Inner Space.
Yeah, that's.
I didn't even know.
And you still say that to a lot of people, and they don't know what you're talking about.
Right. Because it came out.
Even the Burbs, surprisingly.
Because
Whereas Gremlins is a phenomenon.
Right.
Right. They made toys. Right. This was
Right.
merchandise.
Right. And what's really cool about him is that he's the first to say, like, you know, I got, you know, my career got a lift because I was spoiled because I had Steven Spielberg as a producer. And he's not someone who, a lot of times, like, people who will kind of downgrade, or it's a hip thing to say, yeah, Spielberg produced my movie, but
Right.
he was, you know, he didn't let me do this and do that. But he was like, no, he was a buffer between me and the studio, so that when I wanted to do something,
Right.
he went to bat for me.
Right.
And
Which is pretty cool.
it's really cool. And I guess, like, the Gremlins script, the original script, was going to be like a full-blown horror movie, and Gizmo actually turned into Stripe.
Wow.
Right. And then and Spielberg
That
was
changes the whole scope of the film.
right. And Spielberg was the one who was like, you know, he's really cute. The audience likes him.
For the first time, I think I see Gremlins as like a Western. And those bad Gremlins are like Lee Van Cleef and like all the guys,
Right.
all the villains like sitting around that saloon, and then it's almost like this, you know, the hero has to find themselves
Right.
together. Yeah, it's, I don't know, man. I never saw it like that until just now.
Well, and it is like, you know, Gizmo becomes the, you know, he's the hero that he's put upon, and he has to
Right.
fight back.
Right.
You know, he has to find it within himself to fight back. And, you know, in the first one, it's because he watched the racing movie, right?
And in two, it's Rambo.
yeah.
You know, I didn't think about how, you know, we talk about his, Joe Dante's love of movies. I mean, just if you think about just the level of meta, just pop culture referencing going on in Gremlins 2
Yeah.
is one of the most ever. I mean, just setting it at that network.
Right.
And you're dealing with like all the, and man, John Glover is
Kills it.
just that's one of my favorite performances in anything ever.
Right. And, you know, and it's a similar thing. Like, he was supposed to be like a bad guy. He was supposed to be.
So they give him like an Ebenezer Scrooge type like
Yes.
character arc. See, that's
Because he's playing him so gosh darn, like, you just can't hate him.
Yeah,
you
right.
know? And he's
He's
funny.
like John C. McGinley in that regard, where they're so good at being sinister,
Yep.
but they can be
Heartwarming.
these likable characters if they want to be.
Right. And it's all throughout his work. You know, we mentioned Explorers.
Mm-hmm.
It's that same thing. It's like, not only is he, like, when we did the episode on Forbidden Planet, I never realized that in the scene in Explorers, when he's talking about Forbidden Planet, they do that same overhead, wonderful wide shot.
It's like Altman talking about Touch of Evil while doing the shot.
Right.
You know, it struck me while you were saying that Spielberg may be the better director, but I'd say that Dante captures lightning in a bottle more in his career.
Right.
Like, something about those movies capture the magic of filmmaking in a way that, like, Explorers for me there's something so pure about it. And he really seems to be capturing the essence of what it means to be young and to be imaginative and to dream.
Right.
I mean, it's really phenomenal.
Yeah. And he's kind of a lesson in how to take a studio movie and infuse it with your own personality.
Right.
Right. You know, I think Spielberg does that. So I think with Spielberg, it's like his personality just matches with the movies that he makes so well
Right.
that it's hard to discern that it's his personality, because it just fits into that audience picture so
I think
well.
he looks at filmmaking differently
Yeah.
than Dante. Like they're almost like making different kinds of pictures. Like,
Well, and I think like my theory is that while Spielberg is a great director, he's also a great businessman, and that can't help just inform his storytelling and his way of filmmaking.
Absolutely.
Like just thinking about the audience.
how
in
can I
certain
reach
way
as many people
as
as
possible?
possible,
Right. And
while
with
still making something that I hold to be artistically
right.
intact?
And Dante, it's like you feel like he's looking at the script and he's like, okay, now how do I put myself, like, how do I get in here? How do I, not in a, not in a Quentin Tarantino-esque kind of way where
Right.
it's like, I'm gonna beat you over the head with my personality. But he's just like, how do I find my way in here? And he does. And the more you look at his work, the more you see it. If you're watching the movie, like it's not like it's so apparent to you.
Right.
But when you do watch them and you know that that's a part of who he is, you can't help but see it all over the place.
We didn't mention that. It's another thing that really didn't occur to me either when I was watching it, and maybe it did such a good job of continuing the story throughout and just having you be caught up in it, but it never leaves that one neighborhood.
Nope.
Right? And I mean, similar to, is it Rope?
Yep.
There's a handful of movies where Lifeboat,
Right.
where that happens, and it's a tough thing to pull off. One of the more recent films that did it is Buried with Ryan Reynolds, which I thought did a great job of it. You're inside of a coffin the whole time.
Right.
I mean, it's like you got to really have a good movie, a well-written movie to pull that off, and they do.
Yeah. And I think they even talked about it like maybe there was a scene where they cut to like the police station that is somewhere else. But that he wanted it to be, especially with like that amazing opening shot where the Universal logo, you zoom right into it, and then find the neighborhood. And the other thing with it is it's one of those movies where it kind of it balances this tone of this underlying real darkness and the goofy fun that it wants to be. So obviously it's going to have the issue of how do we resolve it in a satisfying way. And I guess they had 3 different endings and 3 different endings that they shot, and they tried. Now the one ending, which I actually kind of like, is that Tom Hanks has his speech where he's like, we're the lunatics, we're the crazy people, and then he's in the ambulance, and then Klopeks comes in, and he has the whole thing where it's like, and he takes out the thing, and it turns out that he is, and then Pinocchio, the son, gets in the ambulance, the door shuts, and the ambulance drives away. And then credits rolled.
Right.
And I just thought, it's just like a perfect, like punctuated, like Twilight Zone ending where it's like, it's very dark and it makes you think. But the audience was like, no.
So they tested it
Yeah.
on some audiences?
Yeah. And then they had one where that he has the speech and the speech holds water and they don't end up being crazy people.
Which is what the film sells you on.
Right.
If you're watching it
Right.
and you're not thinking, because I watched this so many years after I'd seen it that I forgot really what was, so I was like, oh wow, yeah, they're the,
Right.
And you have the thought before he even has his speech, I like made my note of like, yeah, they're the ones that are causing all the, and it's like, it's really great because it sells you on that in order to.
Right. And sadly, in Roger Ebert's review of it, which I think is like either 2 or 2.5 stars, he says that he's like, I wanted the movie where it ends that they are like they're the ones that are, and they're just normal people.
But it's almost saying like it's both.
Right.
So I mean, it just as easily could have been that they aren't guilty.
You get the great thing, like the great moment of his speech, with that the great way that Tom Hanks plays it. What do you want me to say? That you want me to move?
He's similar to Nicholson, not in his acting style, but in the sense that to allow himself to have these Hanks moments,
Right.
which are similar to a Nicholson moment in energy, is that you have to start it by being a little bit like, it has to come from somewhere, right? It's not sourceless. And I think that's what makes it so potent when it finally happens, is you can see the logical sequence that leads to this eruption, right?
Right. It's like when he's lying there and he comes and wakes him up and he's like, I'm just trying to take a nap. I'm just sitting here with my eyes closed, just trying to get some goddamn sleep. It's great. Or when he goes to run into the house and she runs out and hits him with the, and then he takes the cans and he's like,
yes. Oh, that was great.
And she goes, there, you crushed a can. You feel better? But, no, you're right. And he's always believable. He never does a thing where you don't 100% buy it.
And there's those movies like Bachelor Party and stuff where you really felt like they were milking him for, what he is, rather than having it come from. But it's like you're going to have those.
But it also says something about him that he was able to rise above that, not getting typecast, finding these roles that eventually led to.
And I'm still a fan of Joe versus the Volcano and a lot Dragnet and a lot of those old.
It will be somewhere. In a future season, but it is not the bomb.
No, it's not. It's a very misunderstood movie.
Yes.
Yeah. I forgot what I was going to say. But
okay, sorry.
Oh no, it's all good.
Bruce Dern.
Yeah.
Man, it's so. He's always such an intense character. That for me, and this really kind of was my introduction to Bruce Dern, and watching kind of my parents, like, who knew him from his other earlier things, and then going back and watching them, it is really fun to see him just have a ball with this movie and get on so well with it and get on so well with everyone. They had a great time doing it, and you feel that even when there's scenes where they're not getting along or they're making fun of each other or whatnot, that afterwards, like as soon as they called cut, they were laughing.
It has the sense of adventure of a Mark Twain story, like Tom Sawyer. And Huck Finn. Reading those books, I just remember like the feeling of like when they're hiding, and seeing them like look for the goal, seeing the bad guys, and it has that sense of, you feel that, like he can't wait to, like when he like has his wife fooled, and then he goes into the den with them. He's like, no, this is what we're doing. You really feel that he feels like alive.
Right.
It's almost like an adventure story for adults.
Yeah, and that still has that childlike energy to it.
Like a more like a almost recapturing your misplaced youth.
And even like the moment, when they go over to the Klopeks house to meet the neighbors, that he is sneaking onto the backyard, and the whole thing about throwing him the jackhammer and it hits him in the head and all that stuff, and that moment where I wrote a note. I left it under the thing. It's like, yeah. They saw me write a note and leave it under Walter's doorstep, so now they're going to think that I did. And then when the note comes back and he's like, "No, it's a receipt. It's you know, a wrapper. No, it's my note."
You just made me think. He's using the card to open the door. The card splits. He goes, "It's a shit store anyway." It's amazing.
Right.
Thing is, another line that would be great in an improv scene,
Right.
and it wouldn't be played for laughs.
Right.
It's something you would say to try to console your friend.
Right.
That's why it's funny, right? And maybe it is a shit store, so it's observational humor, right? It's not like. Were you a fan of Eerie, Indiana?
Yes.
I was big time. Like that whole CBS lineup, where it was Eerie, Indiana at I think 8, maybe or 9. I think it was 8, and then something else at 8:30, and then Picket Fences for an hour at 9. And that was just a great time for TV because there was a lot going on at that time. And Eerie, Indiana was, I sort of knew it was like from the same universe, and it turned out I didn't even know that Joe Dante was involved in that and directed 5 episodes and had his hand in it so much because it really was like this cool with the 2 twins from Terminator 2 that play the
Right.
I mean they're in it. I mean it's a really cool pod people kind of show.
And it is. It's one of those things that, you know, I only found out about Joe Dante's involvement as well retroactively. But it's one of those things where you find it out.
Like of course.
Like,
It just makes sense.
Yeah. Definitely. Did you see this when you were a kid?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was definitely, I mean, it's not something I saw in the theater, but I can't even really remember when it happened. It must have just been on cable, but I was definitely into it. I mean, it was a cool movie back then. It was a movie that, like, you went to school and, like, kids were talking about it.
Right. I just, Henry Gibson, and then, was it Brother, the hell's his name? Brother something? I don't know.
Are those the
Klopeks.
Klopeks?
Yeah.
I mean, they cast them. It was great because it's almost like different types of actor. Like it's like the casting was so specific. I love when he called him Pinocchio. Where are you going, Pinocchio? Like, Bruce Dern just has a very funny way of saying things, man.
Right.
He has a great delivery.
Easy. I was 10 months in the bush and I could snap your neck like a twig.
And you know, his it's like I feel like that the motif of like the older, eccentric but cool dude with the, you know, the hot younger wife has been done, but it feels like Modern Family. It's like uses it. It's like an oft-played motif, but in this it's kind of cool because it's like she actually really does love him, and they have a cool relationship. Yeah, you know, where it almost seems like a caricature, but it's really not. And actually, it's similar to Bill and Ted almost in the whole like just the way Corey Feldman is always like checking her out, and then it's like not really hiding it, and then Bruce Dern has to just sort of deal with that.
The kid next door is a meatball.
It's a meatball. And then they're daring each other to ring the doorbell. I mean, there's just great lines throughout.
There's a Walter's dog just took a dump on his lawn.